Hey there, how are you doing? This is me, Jenny Kirk, and you're watching my YouTube channel. And thanks for tuning in. And we've got something really special here today. So without further ado, let's take a closer look. Well, we've got the packaging here, and it's really, really substantially done. I do like these boxes. It's come from Hattons Model Railways, and they've acted as the manufacturer themselves, commissioning this from a factory somewhere in China. But there's no indication of actually who or which company has done the actual manufacturing process. But what they've got here is a really nice package. And in fact, I'm going to show you how this compares to... This is a standard Bachmann box. So we've pretty much got the same footprint as that. It's ever so slightly bigger. But it's catalogue number... I'm just looking around for the catalogue number there. H4-P-003, and this is the P-class locomotive, and it's interesting to note that they didn't really have much of a lead between announcing this and it turning up. It's been out for a couple of months now. When we go into the box, we've got this heavy-duty foam lining, and it actually reminds me a lot of the boxes that Helgen locomotives have come in, and latterly Daypol as well. So I don't know whether that gives some small clue to which factory is actually manufacturing these. I'm going to pull all of this out, and I'm going to put this to one side. And we do actually have an instruction leaflet here, but it's... Oh look, it's in full colour. And it's actually really informative because we get a little bit of information there about extra bits and pieces that come in a detailing pack for you to add, but also oiling points. And it's interesting, some of these pictures are taken straight off the CAD files. I'll put that to one side as well. So on the inner thing, we've got the actual locomotive itself. Now the P-class was designed and built, at least initially, in 1909 for the South Eastern and Chatham Railway. And they built 2 in 1909 and then a further 6 the following year in 1910. And the intention of these was to be able to replace some rather underpowered steam-powered rail motors, and they weren't really quite up to the job. And they were very heavily influenced by the London, Brighton and South Coast Railways Terriers. Unfortunately, by cutting costs in the construction, they ended up being a little bit smaller, but only having around 73% of the tractive effort of the slightly larger Terriers. So for the intended application for them, they didn't actually turn out to be all that successful. That said, they did manage to survive en masse into British Rail period, and 4 of the 8 have actually survived. They were used for shunting, and during the First World War, 2 of these locomotives were taken into stock by the Rail Operating Division and used for shunting at Boulogne. They did actually prove to be a little bit underpowered for that, so they were replaced with the South Eastern and Chatham Railway T-class instead, and they were then shipped back to the UK. But it is a claim to fame that they did participate in the First World War on the continent. This particular model is one of a number that Hattons have done in a huge number of different liveries. Now, the really ornate, lined out, fully lined South Eastern and Chatham Railway liveried versions are still outstanding. They haven't been delivered yet, and that's the livery to match the very desirable C-class, the Hornby H-class, Wainwright H-class that they did comparatively recently. So if you want a locomotive to be a total match with those, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. But this is the South Eastern and Chatham Railway Austerity Grey livery. They started to get painted into these. In fact, all of the South Eastern Chatham Railway locomotives run the chance of being painted into this during the First World War, when labour was in short supply. So it was a much easier and cheaper livery to be able to apply to them. And I've gone for this because it does match the C-class from Bachmann and also the N-class from Bachmann as well, which I've already got models of. So really, really pleased with this. The weight on the model is actually quite surprisingly heavy, and a really good comparison here, I'm just going to fish it out, is the slightly older ex-Dapol, the Hornby Terrier, and given that these locomotives were heavily inspired by these in real life, I thought it'd be a good comparison between the two. Well, certainly weight-wise, despite being slightly smaller, the P-Class is actually heavier than the Hornby Terrier, but of course it is a much newer model, so built to newer standards, and that's only to be expected. In terms of footprint, if we put these down here, we can see that the Terrier is noticeably bigger. So, these were always considered to be quite a small locomotive in model form. So to see something turn up even smaller is quite amazing, especially given just how well this P-Class actually runs. And I've tried it out in the shed, and I got footage of it going through the point work, and after even actually just a very minor length of running in, it seems to have run pretty faultlessly. There's a good deal of weight, so it doesn't stutter. It does seem to have a lot of power, in fact probably more power than the full-size prototype would have had. So I've had it pulling some unprototypically long trains, which is really pleasing to see. In terms of first impressions, well, we've got a lot of detail on there, a lot of separately applied detail. The RRP for these locomotives is £99, so they come in just under the £100 bracket. But we've got some very, very fine handrails there on the boiler. We've got some pipe work, we've got the Westinghouse air pump there, and these are all separately applied fittings and really, really well done. Underneath the boiler, we've got the prototypical air gap, so it's always good to see. I know Oxford Rail came in for a lot of criticism for not managing to capture that on the Adams radials, so it's really good to see that there's a very close attention to detail from Hattons, and we have that replicated. Other fittings and pipework, well, even down to, there's very, very fine pipe there, and it is perfectly applied. They've even got the very, very prototypical way that it hangs perfectly done there. I mean, the level of detail on this, I have to give this 10 out of 10. Hattons have really pulled out all the stops for what is their first solo commission, as opposed to something that's been commissioned through a manufacturer. We've got the steps on there, and these are actually really, really fine. They must be metal. I can only assume that they're metal. There is a little bit of, I'm looking there, let's have a look. Yeah, a detraction I can see is that on this side, these steps, the metal, is bent upwards on both of those. I've only just really noticed that. When I look back at the video of this running out in the shed, just when I was making sure all was well, I'll see whether actually you can see if these were bent like this straight out of the box. But certainly, you're going to have to be a little bit wary with some of this detail just to make sure that you don't break it off. But certainly in the handling here, it seems to have held up pretty well. We've got fully sprung buffers front and back, and we've got the vacuum hoses ready applied on there. Also, if we turn it over, we've got all the brake rigging and the sanding gear all comes factory applied, and that's really good to see. I know there was a period where, from certainly Bachmann and Hornby, locomotives were coming with these in a separate bag for the user to fit, and that could be really, really difficult because there's very, very small lugs for them to line up. But here, you don't have to worry about that. One thing to say, though, is if you need to get the NEM pockets out, then you're going to have to perhaps remove this just to get access there. And I think as well, if you need to dismantle some of this gear to either fit a DCC chip, it does come DCC ready with a 6-pin socket, but I do believe you have to be very careful in your choice of DCC chip because there's not an awful lot of space inside this thing. The couplings, again, already fitted, easy to replace these for KDs. We've also got the chassis and the wheels all correctly finished in the colour necessary for this livery. Other liveries that are available, well, as I said before, the really ornate, fully lined out SE&CR livery is forthcoming in 2 different running numbers. But we've got this, the Austerity Grey. We've also got 3 different Southern Railway liveries from memory, including Egyptian lettering, including the much, much smaller lettering, and also the Monsal Green. We've also got British Rail liveries in both early and late crest available, and then a whole brace of private owner and preservation liveries. We've got Primrose in black, as she ran in the early years of the Bluebell Railway. We've also got Bluebell herself in the kind of, it's a bit like the South Eastern and Chatham Railway fully lined livery, but in a lovely overall blue, and apparently that has been the best selling of all the liveries thus far. And then there's also the two that were sold into industrial use before they passed into preservation. So Pioneer 2 and a kind of South Eastern and Chatham Railway style livery, and also Pride of Sussex, which is also apparently proved quite a popular model because a lot of people do remember her from her industrial service that allowed her to survive. And given that these were an unsuccessful class, it's surprising just how 50% of them have survived. One notable livery, which there's no sign of an announcement as of yet, but may well be forthcoming at a later date, is the South Eastern and Chatham Railway more austere green livery. That is currently not available, not listed as forthcoming, and I'd be interested to see whether Hattons take on that livery for a future release. The quality of the printing on this, well, it doesn't have the complex lining that some of the other models have, but it does have the works plate, this silver and red SE&CR plate, and also the number 754. These locomotives, actually, a little note about the numbering, they weren't numbered sequentially until they reached British Rail days, and this was because apart from the first two locomotives, they were actually all taking on numbers of earlier withdrawn locomotives, so they had quite a range of numbers from 27 up to around the 700s, and it's just a strange way of numbering them, but I suppose it was just the way the South Eastern and Chatham Railway did things. We also have what appears to be, I think it's a turned metal whistle, but when I'm just touching that, it does feel a little bit loose in its socket. So that's one maybe to watch out for, because you don't want that to come out and get lost and leave an ugly hole. The coal in the bunker, it does look overly full, and I'm not sure why exactly this might be. Either the space underneath for the DCC chip, or more probably with a lot of these locomotives, they filled every available spare bit of space with weight, and that's just a factor of that. But it would have been nice to have a little bit of the inside of that coal bunker a little bit more visible to make it look more realistic, and also to provide space if you want to add a dusting of real crushed up coal just to make it look a little bit more authentic. The glazing in the cab is very flushly done. It's interesting actually, from the outside that is really nicely done with this almost metallic edge to the circular glazing, and that is really nicely done. It does look like those are metal. I don't know whether they actually are metal, but they do certainly look the part. However, when you look inside the cab, I'm just looking in there, there seems to be a glazing piece that runs all the way across the back. The cab itself is painted underneath, but once you see it, it's very difficult to unsee it. So for some people that might be a little bit of a minor detraction. That said, if you fit this locomotive cab with a crew, then that's not really the biggest of issues. The back head on the boiler and firebox there is nicely finished. I'm looking in there, there's an awful lot of gauges, pipework, and it's all individually finished, picked out in different colours, and that is really nice to see. I mean, it has to be said, that's going above and beyond the call of duty, because generally speaking, when you're running these, it'd be very difficult, if not impossible, to see most of that, but it is nice to see it there. One other thing that I have noticed, which is pleasing to note, is that there is a prototypical gap underneath these side pieces, these sort of closable bits for the crew in the cab, and there's actually an air gap underneath. It would have been very easy for Hattons to cut a corner there, but they haven't. And when you turn it into the right angle, you can see an air gap all the way through the cab, and that is prototypical, and it is really nice to see that level of attention to detail. There isn't really much else to say about this. What could have been a very drab and austere wartime grey livery has been well realised, and this locomotive has a lot of character, and I'm looking forward to making really good use of it. It must be one of the smallest locomotives released ready to run thus far. So as a comparison, the Hattons P-Class with the Kernow Model Centre Stroke Daypole BT well tank, certainly a lot smaller than that. The Dapol stroke Hornby Terrier, smaller than that, but certainly a lot more weighty, it has to be noted. And finally, the Dapol stroke Hornby Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Pug, and they're actually a fairly close size. The P-Class is marginally bigger, but when you think this is supposedly a tiny, tiny dock shunter, and this was built to run passenger trains, it is amazing just how small the P-Class actually is. If we turn to the packaging here, we can see that Hattons do provide you with quite a wealth of separately user-fittable detail. Now, to me, the locomotive looks really, really nicely done without any hint of anything being missing. But if you so desire, we've got front couplings, we've got extra hoses, we've got lamps, we've got head code discs, and some of the bits and pieces, I'm not even sure what some of these are, but we've got them all there, and it may well be that in the paperwork we've got a little bit of a hint as to where some of these go, but they're all perfectly finished in the appropriate colours. So in fact, I'm looking even there at possibly steam heat hose or something like that. The little piece that's in the bag is finished in multiple colours, and that really is just an amazing attention to detail. It just has to be commended there. Overall, I give this, well, I'm going to have to give it a 10 out of 10. I've found nothing major of fault, and anything that has been a little bit off perhaps, like the slightly bent steps, is not really the end of the world. And I have to say that this model has blown me away, so much so that I am really, really looking forward to the Hattons Andrew Barclay shunter that's really due imminent at any moment now. And it will make me look at a new light at any further commissions that Hattons brings forward, because this model has shown that every attention to detail is there. This is a superb model. Well, I hope that was really informative to you. Don't forget to like this video, share it too, and thanks again for watching. Subscribe to the channel. You'll be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. But until next time, you take really good care of yourself. And this is me, Jennifer Kirk, saying bye for now. Today's video has been brought to you in part thanks to the generous donation of my fans on Patreon. And a special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Mark Anthony and Michael Churchwood. If you'd like to help support the show, head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk. Thank you. Today's video has been brought to you by my books, Bringing Home the Stars, Twinkle Little Star, and also you can get the complete comic collections of All Over the House, Books 1, Books 2, and also the wacky zany Life of Knobty Mouse. Thanks, and catch you later.